Okay, good morning. Good morning. Ayin Beis, Volume 3. We are on page 1363. Malchus. Talking about Malchus. So the last paragraph was about the second interpretation, less lo megar mo klum, that Malchus has nothing of its own, only that which it receives through the avodah lamata. So let's not forget the first interpretation is that only it has nothing of its own, only that it receives mamayla from above, from Zah. And that was discussed at length, that even though Malchus gives birth, but it needs the catalyst of Zah, and it's Zah that's nimshach. Essentially, Malchus is the carrier, a channel of the energy from higher levels through Malchus. That means less lo megar mo klum. Now we're talking less lo megar mo klum. It has nothing of its own except that which it receives through Avodah. And the point being, through Allah's man, that we see that Malchus, for it to be stimulated, for it to be awakened, aroused, you need to have the Yisayirus HaMelucha hu ayidei hazulas dafka. And there came the contrast with Midas, with Zah. Midas, to actualize a Midah, to express it, you need another to be kind to, or to be disciplined to, Gvura, or to fer all the Midas. But the very Midah itself, the faculty, and even the Amshacha from the Nefesh of the faculty, meaning that it's actually a existing faculty, and even the Yisayirus of the faculty, can all happen without another person. You're wired with chesed inside your nefesh, especially a isha chesed who has even a smoother flow, as he put it. Hamshacha teva, coming from the nefesh of kindness. Furthermore, that's just the faculty. Even when he's asleep, he can actually have an awakening in his heart that he wants to be kind, and actually have tsar, like Avram, pain, that he doesn't have someone to bestow kindness to. All this is without anyone else. Then he needs another person to actually, or another entity, to actually bestow the kindness to. But the midah is a full-blown midah without the zulas. Malchus is not like that. Even though Malchus is an inherent component, it's not created by another. That's important to keep in mind. It's not like, for example, without another person, I'm just trying to think of an example. Someone else gives you something that without that you don't have it. Malchus is also one of the 10 faculties and 10 spheres. He called it Hamshacha. You can't say in the B'chinas Hamshacha klal, but it's Hamshacha that is not even Nelemes. You can't call it a Mokar ala Gilui because it doesn't have any manifestation. Basically saying a true leader is not in pain if he can't lead or if he's not leading. Not talking about a politician or somebody who has an ego. We're talking about a real leader. So Malchus essentially is an inherent faculty. Like he said, every human being has an aspect of it. And that's why we have an element of a natural dominance, an ability to control, like he said, to conquer and control. And he connected it even with bchira, with free will, with will. The power to control yourself, which animals don't have. But that's not like the faculty of chesed that's active, however, not actualized. Actualized meaning in actually giving kindness. Melucha, for it to become activated, that you need the zulas. You need another to come and crown the king and say, we want you to be our king. The bittul of the Am, like he says, the Malchus on its own is betachlis ahelam benafshe. The ein b'chinas hamshacha, and that's why to awaken it, you need extra effort. To awaken chesed, you don't need an effort from anyone outside of the person. The person has chesed inside them, and it gets stimulated from time to time. Here it says, It's much more difficult. Like we see that you need the am to demonstrate total bittul, total subjugation, and total nullification with their entire will, and saying we are completely committed to you. And that's Meseder by Keich HaMelucha v'HaMshala. Ma'ashe'ene came b'shari HaKeiches. That's not the case with other faculties. Like, for example, Hashpas HaSeichel. To transmit Seichel, yes, you need a student that's receptive, but you don't need a student that's completely bottle, in the sense where he's got like a servant, where he's completely nullifies himself with the presence of his student, of his teacher. Ein klal beifem bittul kazeh. And that's because you need to bring Melucha out from a much more dormant and much more innermost place within the nefesh. It's there, but that's why to access that, and especially to bring it a gili of Midas Melucha, which is not revealed even to the person himself, like Chesed is, that requires much that effort. That's stronger effort. Right? There's no gili at all of Malchus without azulas. In Chesed, there is a gili to yourself. Yeah. And then he finally added the final point was that Chesed and Gvura could be, you can give Chesed and Gvura even to children and to people that are close to you, your beloved ones. That element of that distance and that utter bittul of servant to king or subject to king is not shaykh on children and on loved ones. Only on avodim v'nefradim dafka. And he says, why is that the case? For the same reason, because midas chesed and gvura don't require such a type of effort and distance. That's why you could also be mashpiyat on another, because the midas is more about the person, the one who's giving. And since it's more about the person, so he has chesed, he can give it to anyone, he can give it to his children too. But melucha is not about the person, it's about the other awakening it in you. And the other is it's not so close. So therefore, melucha is specifically not to everyone, only to those that are distant in the sense of strangers or avodim, like he puts it. That's the way he says it here. Okay. That's a summary of what we learned yesterday. Now he's going to go back and say, this is the mashal. Now we'll understand from this how it is, melucha l'mayla, getting back to the second interpretation that Malchus is nothing of its own without another. In this case, the Allah Asman, the Aveda from below. I'll just add one piece of explanation. I also liked what Rab Shlomo said yesterday, which I forgot that, honestly, but I remember he said it was a good point. But I think the key thing to remember, especially in context of everything we're learning, in a broader context, the difference between Malchus and the other midas and faculties is this. One is a focus on you, the mashpia, and remember the Me'era Mashpia and Era Makabel. So earlier he said the Era Mashpia and Makabel is different in two ways. The Mashpia is Gilui, and the Makabel is Helam. I'm reading now, I'm just summing up what we learned on page 1356 and 1357. So one is Helam and Gilui and Helam. So it's about Gilui. That's what Mashpia is. You were created to give, to illuminate, to shine to others. Like a classic example is the sun. The moon, on the other hand, Era Makabel, its union is to receive. And receiving is more of a process of absorbing and actually not shining. Like later, the expression later, And when you're busy absorbing, you can't be revealed, you can't be exuding. That's its role. Its role is more of a helam role. It's not about being megal, it's about being receiving. Oydesh Hefresh, she said, the second difference is mashpia is atzmi v'tivi. It's within, everything is self-contained. God created a mashpia in a way that he has what he needs, both the power to give and what to give. Makabel, his role is not to be that. So he, whatever he gives is what he receives from the mashpia. And the power to give is also coming from another place. Now, this is not a weakness or a strength. This is two different features in every one of us. In other words, a healthy human being needs both. There needs a time when you're in the mashpia mode, and there's a time when you're in a makabel mode. They're both necessary in life. Yes, it's true that in general, the zohar, the male, is more mashpia than the woman and female, but let's be honest. Zohar also has Malchus in him, and Malchus also has Zoh. In other words, a woman also has Zoh. She's not just purely she's not a one-sphere entity. We're talking about the archetype of the feminine archetype or the male archetype. But the point I want to make to bring it back to what we're learning now, it's the same idea. Midas, their purpose is to give, is to bestow, whether it's chesed or gvura, but it's all something, even gvura is not called giving, but gvura is also sharing a certain feature, a certain faculty called gvura. Just like when you have chesed is the flow, gvura is, let's say, the pause, the restraint. Their role, the six midas, their role is a very specific role, that to emanate. Their role is to give something, like the sun. If the sun doesn't shine, it's not fulfilling its purpose. If a mashpia of Zoh is not giving off the energy that each sphere has to give off, it's not doing what it has to do. Malchus has a very different role. Malchus' role is not to give. Malchus' role is to channel. And what does channeling means? First of all, makabel. It's a makabel fundamentally. That's why lesla megama klum, both in its nakuda, it's only a nakuda. It's not a full, it doesn't have six facets on its own. Even when it becomes a mashpia, it's channeling Zoh, like we learned. So Malchus' whole identity is not about itself. It's not about being self-contained and giving off. It's about other. Now, the other could be either it's receiving from Zoh, that's the first interpretation, or it's being stimulated from below. So in other words, if you take away Malchus from the picture, all human beings we'd be self-contained entities that have faculties. We have Chachma, Bina, Das, we can conceive of ideas, we have our cognitive skills, our cognitive faculties, we have our emotional faculties, but we wouldn't have this aspect of being a total absorber and recipient, or being someone that is completely stimulated by the other, that turns you into being a leader and a mashpia. Zoh is not a melech. Zoh is a mashpia. So Zoh's role is to give. Yes, it needs another to give to, just like all midas. You need a relationship. Zoh is about relationships. A relationship. Whether it's through chesed, gvura, teferes, netzach, chayid, yesod. Malchus is not about it's not a mashpia, it's a melech. So either it's in a mode of receiving, meaning from Zoh, or it's in a mode of being stimulated. It doesn't have a self-contained entity. Yes, there's in the individual there is the Malchus, but it's completely stimulated by and activated by another. In this case, the avoda lamata, or in the moshel, the am that relates to it. And that's why also Malchus has the element. If you didn't have Malchus, you wouldn't have a dira b'tachtenim. You'd have God would create angels and souls that relate to him, that are similar to him, like brothers and sisters, or even children. Zoh is like a child, or siblings, because they're more commensurate to each other. Malchus introduces the concept of another as a nifrat. And when you want to have a world that's not Atzilus, Biyah, all the way down to Tachtenim, that's much more the relationship of a Melech that's more distant from his people than an Av and a Ben. Av and Ben is much more the example of the Neshamas of Atzilus. That's what they call Bonim there. Once you get into Biyah, it's called Neshamas of Biyah, called Neshamas that are called Avodim. Now, obviously, there's overlap and there's commonalities in certain areas. But in general terms, the idea of Malchus also creates something that is far more distant, which is also, he's introducing here as being part of this process. Whereas Zah is more of a mashpia to a teacher to students, a father to children. But if you want to have that type of relationship of something so distant, you need to have Malchus, which has this paradoxical element that it has nothing of its own, but at the same time, it channels everything from above, and it's created and essentially, let's say created, but generated and completely triggered from the Aveda below. Just wanted to throw that into the discussion. For a little Havana here. Does anyone want to ask anything, or should I'll read on? Okay. Dugmam is called so the new paragraph on page 1363, pages that can be found at ayinbeis.com. Dugma, this is all a dugma, because till now he's been speaking about a melech and an am, a king and a nation and a people. So what's the dugma? Yuvam b'bchinas hamalchus l'mayla. From all this, the example will be an example from which we will understand malchus l'mayla. How does malchus work above in Atzilus, on the divine level? The amshachas hameluchi dafka dehalos man minivraim shalamata. The transmission of malchus, meaning the manifestation of melucha, is not on its own. It's not a self-contained entity. It's based on halos man dafka. Specifically, halos man we know is the expression in Kabbalah for asarusa delatata. Man is the acronym for Mayan Nukfin, the feminine waters, literally, which means, in Ruchnius, it means the Makabul, reaching upward, halos man, the elevation, from the Nivraim Shalamata, and that's what draws down the Melucha. Dafka that. V'hainu, and this means, the binyan of Malchus liyas b'bchinas parsuf, that the binyan of Malchus. Remember, God created Malchus, not we. Humans don't create Malchus. It was created as a Nekuda. Then we're talking about the development of Malchus. So, till now, we talked about the first interpretation, the development from Zah and from above. But here he's speaking that for it to be a parsuf, a structure, not Malchus, not just a point, a structure, that it's not just a point, but there's a rotzen, there's a desire to be a king. That not just a remember snasus atzmis is all within, but that's not an expression of melucha. That's just within the God that God is beyond everything. But that should be snasus al elimus, like we learned earlier when he spoke the first interpretation, that the binyan amalchus comes from rotzen keser and then moichin and midas that allow a king to be a king from above. That this requires a rotzen, the melucha, that he should actually want to be snasus, exalted or lifted, uplifted or not uplifted, in a state of majesty over the worlds. Remember, the partsuf is not just keser, rotzen, that there should also be, he should apply his wisdom and his emotions, his empathy and feelings in Malchus canal. How does all this happen? Now we're talking this interpretation. So in other words, God emanated the sphere of Malchus as a Nekuda. But as a Nekuda, it's just a state of completely absorbing what's above. If you wanted to become an active Malchus, that God should interact with us as a king and interact in the context of the desire to be king, meaning he wants to be related to us as a king, and using wisdom and emotions to interact and care about us and govern us with an intelligence and with empathy and care about all our details and concerns, like he explained on page 1361. But there he explained it in the context of how Malchus is built from above. Now he's talking how it's built from below. So he says all this is to Aveda Sa'adam Dafke. This doesn't happen on its own. I know. I have the same question you probably all have. So what's the difference between this and the first? If it's happening from above, what do you need to be happening from above, below? What's the difference? If Malchus is getting all of this on its own from Zah, so why do we need Avedis Adam? I don't have an answer to that question yet, but it's very clear that he's saying there's a second interpretation. And it's also emes. So I am sure the Rebbe Rashab is going to explain it, but it's definitely a question that I have every time I read this. I right away think, 1 second, didn't we learn that Malchus was already built up from Zah? Not on its own, but it was still built from above. So how is the second interpretation? Is it a different approach? Are they both? You need them both. So the question is hanging there, and if you have it, I also have the question. It was not answered yet, and we'll see. I don't want to jump. Let's see how this develops. Okay,
it's two different aspects.
I could speculate the answer, but I think the Rebbe Rashab is probably going to explain it. Listen, you can't say there's a contradiction here. That's for sure. He said Shnei Emes. So we know they're both right, but let's hold up on that until we get there. That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying we won't address it. I'm just saying I don't have a direct answer. I mean, I could start speculating and guessing. I don't want to do that right now. I mean, you could also say very simple. The first time it was created from above, before Adam and Chava were created, halos man Ayin Beis, so to speak. And from then on, every Rosh Hashana, we have to build it. I mean, that's the most Balabatish explanation. That God created the first time, and he filled up Malchus in a full way, from Zah into Malchus, Mamaila. And from then on, we have to do the Aveda. That would be, if I had to answer the question right now, that's what I would say. But the Rebbe Rashab didn't say it, and I don't want to, the Rebbe is teaching us, so let us see where he's going with this. Okay. I just wanted to acknowledge that it's an obvious question that jumps out at us. That's all I wanted to acknowledge.
I heard what you said. I think that I heard what you said. The second thing is something that the Malchus is not getting from Zoh.
I'm sure that's the case, because if not, there's no purpose in creation. If Malchus got everything from Zoh, what do we need us for? I understand. Of course, we're leading to that. But let's find out. Listen, there's no reason to rush. We'll find out. Hopefully before Rosh Hashana, we'll find out.
There's another paradox here. If how can we be provoking Malchus Halasman, the from Avoda, from below, if Malchus hadn't been Mamshich in the first place down to us? So we're getting from above. We wouldn't be here without that. But yet somehow Malchus needs, in order for Malchus to be reigning, it needs stimulation from below. He wouldn't get any. There would be no stimulation from below if Malchus wasn't Mamshich lower to the lower worlds.
Well, you can put it in simple terms. If God didn't create us, we couldn't crown him as king.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah. I agree. All this will be understood. I will say this, since you're already bringing that up. In volume 2, there was a whole section, a very profound and complex part, where he discussed this very directly. Who's doing what? Is it coming from God? Is it coming from us? So I would just hold up on that, because it's just going to confuse us right now. It's on the table. We know it has to be addressed. So let's leave it at that. All the points you made are good. What you just said, what Reb Shlomo said, it's all correct. We'll address it. We know we need to address it. So, but I really think we'll understand a lot better when we see how the Rebbe Rashab is developing the ideas. And let's see what he says. And if we do need to turn back to volume 2 and see what he said there, we'll do that. I'm sure there's a connection to that. And it's quite fascinating. Chassidus talks about this. This is not like the first time it's discussed. But in Ayin Beis, he definitely develops it more than you find elsewhere. So we'll continue. We'll see what the story is here.
You don't remember the conclusion in volume 2? Because I certainly don't, but maybe you do.
A conclusion, listen, it's climbing a mountain. There's always going to be deeper levels of understanding. But there's certain basics. Let's see how it goes here. Ukiyadua. Let's continue. This is Mamish Rosh Hashana material, by the way. It's all about Rosh Hashana. As you see, he's bringing all these different meluchas. Ukiyadua, the Adam Arishan, as it's known that Adam Arishin Himshich Bechinas HaMelucha Yidei Kabbalas El Malchus Shemayim, or Kabbalas El Malchus. That Adam Arishin, when he was created, what did he accomplish? What did he do? He drew down Melucha through his accepting the yoke of Malchus, of God's Malchus. Shazeu Shir Shel Yom Vav. This is what Adam Arishin did. This is the Shir Shel Yom Vav. Every day we have the Shir Shel Yom, right? What's the song of the sixth day? The day Adam and Chava were created. The first Rosh Hashana was a Friday. So what's the Shir? Hashem Melech Geyus Lovash. Like he brought earlier. Where did he bring that? I think it was on page 1361. Yeah. Hashem Melech Geyus Lovash, Hashem Mislabish Belavush Geyus, Lias Bechinas Melucha. That God dresses in the garment of Gaius. Gaius can be sometimes seen negatively as Gaiva, but here it means exaltedness. So he dresses in the garment of majesty, of Melucha. And this is achieved on sixth day because Adam Arishin triggered that. The Kodim Lazeh, prior to the sixth day, Loi Hoy is Galas HaMelucha. There was no revelation of Melucha. God created in the first 6 days of creation, before Adam, God created the whole world from heaven to earth. Vegetation, the celestial bodies, the animals, the fish, the birds, everything. But you can't say there was Melucha in this world. God wasn't reigning over them. He created them. It was Adam that accepted. Until that point, that Adam did not receive, did not accept, did not coronate, essentially, God's Malchus, God's authority, God's sovereignty. So before that, till the Adam Arishin didn't do that, there was no Izgalas HaMelucha. So if God would have said to the whole world before Adam was there, hey, I'm your king, that's not kingship. The whole kingship is only possible when someone accepts it and someone says, I want you to be our king. I want you to be our leader, our authority.
So Adam Arishin actually...
It says, the Medrash says that he said,
He said
that
that's
Adam Arishin gathered together, it says, all the creations, all the creatures, and said, let us now all prostrate ourselves and honor and accept God as our king. That's Hashem Melech Geyus Lovash, essentially. And that's when God responded, yes, I shall be your king. That was on that first Rosh Hashana, the first 6th day in creation. That's why every Friday we say that Shir Shel Yom. Ukamoi Keinu Achshav. That was then Adam Arishin. That was 5,783 years ago. Now, Kamoi Keinu Achshav, so too now, the whole Rosh Hashana, every Rosh Hashana, Shanimshach B'chinas HaRatzon L'Melucha. That every Rosh Hashana, the Ratzon, God's desire to have a relationship with us as king and subjects, manifests every Rosh Hashana. And how? This is explicitly, specifically, through the work of souls of Israel below. That you will say before me. The Gemara talks about Malchus Zechrein Shefris. Why? When you say Malchus, when you'll say the verses in the Torah that refer to God as king, Kedei, in order that I should reign over you. Shezed Nase Ayidei Neshamis Yisrael Dafka. Who says these Malchus? Who pronounces that? Not that's us. The Neshamis Yisrael Lamata are the ones that pronounce God as king. Okay. So that's consistent with what he said before, that Zah and the middays don't need another to be nimshach, to extend and to be expressed. They need another to be actualized. Whereas Malchus requires the other. And like we see, that other Marishan, and then after that, every Rosh Hashana, the Neshamas Yisrael Lamata do that. Okay. Any questions? V'chein, kol ha'amshachis, shenimshach mizal ha'malchus. So now he's referring. And the same is true, not just with Malchus, but all the amshachas that are transmitted from Zot to Malchus. Hein, mashal etzerich binyana. Both that which is needed for the binyan of Malchus, for the structuring and development of Malchus. The hein mashal etzerich hayichud. And all those energies that are necessary for the yichud. Now you'll say, where does that come from? So he's going to say that we learned earlier that Malchus, the binyan of that Malchus has three different aspects that need to be developed. One is the binyan, the actual binyan of Malchus. The other is the yichud of Malchus. I believe it's the yichud. The yichud of Malchus to be able to create souls for biyah. So that's more than just Malchus being built up. For Malchus to be built, it needs rotzen, and it needs the Chachman Bina and the Midas, Chesed Gvura, and so on. Yichud needs another dimension. So all this, he's saying now, is coming through Avedas Adam. So he's basically saying the first interpretation of everything coming from Zah is now being generated by us through our Avedah. But he's going to now just explain a moment. It's not a tangent, but he's just adding something that we learned earlier in volume 2, chapter, I wrote it down for myself here, chapter 335 and on, in the early sections of volume 2, he said, the commission is barely ill. She has gimel mine gvuras hanim shachem b'chinas hamalchus, b'chinas malchus, that there are three types of gvuras, three types of forces of gvura that are drawn into malchus. Ha'echad l'tzedek binyana, one in order to build up malchus. Ha'beis hanitnim b'yeseda l'tzedek ha'Allah. The second level is what's given into malchus when it's founded, right in the beginning of the nekuda. That will need later when Malchus needs to elevate. And the third level of Gvura is for the Yichud of Malchus. That's the Yichud, the internal unification within Malchus in order to give birth to the Neshamas that will come into Biyah. I know this needs a lot more. One second. This needs some explanation because he just says this briefly. But he's bringing this, but he's connecting it to something, like I said, at page 330, chapter 335. He spoke about this at length. I'll just sum it up briefly. Bottom line is, till now we spoke about Nekudas HaMalchus and the binyan of Malchus. Now he's adding the Yichud of Malchus. So there's the Nekud of Malchus is the point. The binyan of Malchus is bringing all the spheres into it. The second level, he says, Nitnim b'yeseda is really in the Nekud is given a power that later Malchus should be able to be well, I don't know about later. That Malchus the Halah, that Malchus has that element of Halah in it, and the Yichud is in order for Malchus to be mashpia and to be Yah. So all these are forces that need to be drawn to Malchus. So what he's saying is that v'chol zeh nasa ayidei aveda. All this is happening through the work below us when we accept the yoke of heaven, the yoke of the Malchus of heaven, I should say, Vasias klei reikon, and we create an empty container, the bittul we have, so we are receptacle. How do we do that? By being accountable. Morid chushba means the masters of accountability. That we are accountable, making cheshbon nefesh chushbana by the ava the b'chol meidecha b'tfila, and through our love with a full intensity, with even more than our regular faculties, in davening or commission is barely ill. All that is the work we do to draw down all this within Malchus. Everything we just learned.
This is what is the yichud? The yichud with zo?
I think so. I think it's the yichud with Zah, but I think it's a yichud pnimi with Zah, because this yichud shimsha v'sira, the soul, the sun and the moon, Zah and Malchus can have a yichud, but it doesn't yet create a child, so to speak, or a neshama in biyah. That's more the yichud in halal, like that Malchus has been makabel from Zah, it becomes shavim became masa, like we learned. But that's not necessarily yet the yichud pnimi that brings a hiloda in biyah, which I think is what he means here by yichud. They said yichud pnimi. It's a little more details. I know. I would listen. Now I'm not going to go over it now, but maybe on Sunday I can go over this. But for practical purposes, I would suggest, if you want, look it up on chapter 335. If you want to wait till I do it, I'll sum it up maybe on Sunday a bit more, what the different levels are. It's not. Let me put it. It's not going to change a lot of pshat here. It's more details, but it's really comes down. He's just really trying to explain that the whole power of Malchus now is being generated from the Avodah. That's what he concludes now. V'zeu the b'chinas Malchus. I'll just say a few more lines and I'll stop here. V'zeu the b'chinas Malchus lesler megamo klum, and that's the meaning. The second meaning, that Malchus has nothing of its own. Ki'im mashe mekabelas milmato, only that which was received from below. Only that which we, through our Allah man, elevating the Mayan Nukvim from below. Midas HaMalchus will not awaken on its own, will not be awakened on its own. It would only happen when the Nevroim below, they accept Malchus, they say, we accept your sovereignty, your rule, and governance. That's when Malchus gets awakened. And there's no Allah man, what happens then? Then it's not melucha, it's memshala, ulvad. Betachlis atzimtzum or betachlis ahelam. Utter concealment, an utter diminishment, an utter concealment. I thought Mamshala sometimes is Malchusei Beratzon Kibla Aleim. Mamshala is Bal Korchach. In other words, they still will have, God will still run the world, but it'll be in a very, very concealed way. It won't be a relationship where God chooses and wants to rule over us. It will be like, I mean, he doesn't say it here, but sometimes it says Mamshala, it will just be like complete control over us, but rather than, instead of us having a relationship with the Melech. Here he uses the word tachlis atzimtzum, tachlis ahelam, which would mean that without our avodah, yes, if there was hypothetically no avodah at all, the world would still exist, but it would not be in a relationship. It would be basically God is ruling the world just like he ruled it before Adam was created. He also controlled the world, but that's control. That's not kingship in the full sense of the word, which is only possible when there's a nation that's reciprocal, that's welcoming and inviting and coronating the king. This parenthesis needs more explanation as well, but that's what he says right now.
So he's saying that Amshacha from Zoh also depends on Avodah de Milmato.
I read it. I saw, yeah.
That's what it means. That means without the Lamato, the Amshacha from Zoh, Amshala is not perfect.
Well, we didn't finish. I don't know what he's going to say afterwards. Let's see if he addresses that. I don't know. I think the next section is going to talk about it a bit. As I said before, I believe the Rebbe Rashab is going to address this because he's the one that brought these two interpretations. I think the next section he talks about it. If I'm looking quickly, I see that he is. So I would wait till he finishes, and then we'll analyze it.
Rabbi Jacobson.
Yeah, he's going to address it. I think he's going to say exactly that. That also the Amshachas in the first interpretation come through Avodah. The question is if he's going to explain. Yeah, I would wait till we finish the next paragraph. I think that's when we'll have more clarity on this. Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, as an example, I mean, is that marriage is the same way. The wife, which is the Malchut, she's always going to be your wife no matter what. But the fact of the matter is that from time to time, we have to reach out as husbands and I love you and invoke that need that we need to reaffirm our relationship. So that's no different. It doesn't make your wife any more of your wife or any less of your wife, but she still needs to hear from you that you love her, you care about her, you want her in your life, and you want to have a relationship. Okay. So it's very, to me, that's a very simple way of understanding it.
That sounds good. That I would agree. That's a good example.
Accept her as ruler.
No, you have to tell your wife that you are my king, your queen, my queen.
Happy wife, happy life.
Yeah,
happy husband, suspicious wife.
But the opposite way around, because the female is Malchus and we're Zal.
No, it's both ways as well. You could also have husband and wife, and technically they are husband and wife. But when there's a seirus, either from husband to wife or wife to husband, that's a true relationship. The only thing there, I don't like the word melech and eved there, because who's the king, who's the servant? We're not going to get into that right now. But we know the man wears the pants in the family, and his wife tells him what pants to wear. So you decide who's king, But the point I'm making, however, is that's the only difference I would make. But the idea that you could have a connection and it's okay, it's like a relationship at its minimum. But if you want a true relationship between two, you need a seirus for sure. That's the point. Yeah, that's a definitely good example. It's also between parents and children. I mean, you can have parents and children; they're always your child, but doesn't always mean there's a full bodied relationship. He's clearly saying he said tachlis hatzimtzum b'tachlis hahelam. Yeah. Well, there's more to say on this, and I just don't want to jump. The Rebbe Rashab is going to speak about this some more, at least till the end of the next paragraph, where then I think he concludes this section, and then goes back to the three levels of Er Makabel, the moon, the bright stone, and the eyesight and vision. But I think there's still a section. I would finish this, and then I think we can then analyze more the whole issue. Is it coming from Zah? Is it coming from below? So I would just be patient. I think by Sunday, Monday, we should probably cover that. But hey, we're getting through it. It's interesting material, right?
It's great stuff, especially like you said, right around Rosh Hashana.
Yeah, I just want, he says explicitly it's Rosh Hashana, so it's perfect timing. I do want to say one more thing before we stop here. Yesterday was Eliezer asked the question about children, servants, and so on. Avinu Malkeinu, im kabonim, im kavodim. So just keep in mind this. As another point I wanted to just address. We have a mitzvah of Avos Hashem and a mitzvah of Yiras Hashem. Two mitzvahs. Someone say, which one is it? Is it from love or is it from reverence? I don't like the word fear. Reverence, awe, respect. The answer is that to have a good relationship with God, you need both. As I've explained many times, Ava is more like a ben. There's a closeness, there's intimacy. There's something in common between us. You're my father. I'm your child. Yira is more of distance. Distance doesn't mean bad distance. I don't mean distance as in separation. I mean as in respect, that God is not your chaver. He's not your equal. He's not even your father. He's your king. He has an authority over you because he's the creator and you're the creation. So it's a sense of awe and respect. In every good relationship, you need both. Because if you only have Ava, so then you have it on your terms and you relate to it, which is very beautiful. but you don't have a connection to the part of God that's beyond you. In other words, Ava is more like Mamala Kalam. And Yira touches also Sevav Kalam. So if someone will say, which one is it? The answer is you need both. You need both because God is both beyond us, but also part of us. So we don't believe in pantheism, that God is nature and nature is God. We say, Hu Mekayme Shalelim ve'ena elam Mekayme. He's the space of the world, but the space of the world is not him. So there is a connection, but there's a part of God's beyond us. So Ava v'Yira serve different functions, and they complement each other. And even, as I say, even in human relationships, we talked about husband and wife, there has to be an element of closeness where you identify with each other, but there's also an element of mystery. We all know that. There's a mystique. And the mystique is not a bad thing. It's good to know, you know what? I don't get it all. I don't understand my wife in every aspect. Sometimes in almost nothing we can. And the more time passes, as anyone who's been married a long time knows, it doesn't get clear. It gets more mysterious at times. That doesn't take away from the fact that there's a certain element of closeness and real closeness. As a matter of fact, embracing the mystique and the space and the boundaries actually adds in the closeness. It doesn't subtract. Because it's not about control. It's not about, I need to understand everything about my spouse. No, you don't need to. Some things you don't need to understand. You can embrace it without understanding everything. Women work differently. Men work differently. That's life. Nothing wrong with that. It's actually those that know how to accept that and embrace it are the ones that are the closest people. Because they don't get frustrated if I don't always get it all, Just different styles or different approaches, different ways we process. It's like you see anytime friends that are very close, they don't have to be exactly alike. You can have friends that are very different than you. They process differently, they respond differently, and you love them even more in a way because you appreciate things that you don't have. So love and Ava v'Yira work together. Same thing like Ben and Eved work together. It's not a contradiction. It's two different aspects of a really healthy relationship. Just wanted to throw that into the mix. So that's why we learned earlier, Biti, Achesi, Imi, or I mentioned with Kel Deidi Defik. So we say Achesi, Rayosi, Tamosi. What's the third expression there?
Yoinasi.
Yoinasi. They're all, or throughout the Tfilas and Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. We're going to mention at least 4, 5, 6, or even 7 different types of relationships. Sometimes it's like siblings, sometimes like children, sometimes like servants, sometimes like sheep, sometimes like the different expressions, nation, people. So when you look at this, you realize they're not a contradiction. They're all different aspects to a very multifaceted relationship. I just wanted to throw that into the mix.
Well, that was my exact point yesterday, was that when the Rebbe there said yesterday that you can't be a melech over a loved one.
You can't be a melech over a loved one. That's exactly right. Because the relationship with a loved one is not the relationship of a melech. It's the relationship of a father. That's the point. That doesn't mean God can be king and father and he can be 50 other things. But the relationship is a different one and each one has a different aspect to that relationship. On the human level is for sure the case. Like I said, look, just take the example. Can a father suddenly say, I'm King Achashverosh because I have 9 children and they all coronated me as king? Try it out. Anyway, let's stop here. Where am I stopping? Bottom of page 1363. 1363. Last line, literally last